Intentions and Twitter at Higher Intention. Look for us on 99.1 FM, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio, and many more. Over the next hour, we'll introduce you to some fascinating people and engaging discussions that may provide you with answers to assist in revolutionizing your own personal health. And now, here's Dr. Nelson.
This is United Intentions Radio Network. I'm Dr. Nelson Bulmesh, and you're listening to another edition of Health Matters. I have a special guest today. As promised, she has worked in the area of education for more than 30 years. She's been an educator in the capacity of a teacher, as an assistant principal, as a principal, and as an assistant superintendent in the Cobb County School District. Her name is Dr. Traci Doe. Traci, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be here, Nelson.
You're very, very welcome. So tell me real quickly about some of the subspecialties. You have a really unique background that assists you in having the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yes, so now the division Teaching and Learning Support and Specialized Services that I have the opportunity to serve in Cobb County serves students with disabilities, and in the school district we have 16,000 students with disabilities, school counseling, school psychology, which is both paramount to the topic we're talking about today.
Certainly is.
As well as positive school culture, which is we're working very hard to make sure that all students have the opportunity to attend school where there's a positive, nurturing culture.
Right.
And the last part of our division is the Georgia Network for Educational and Therapeutic Support, in which we serve our students with the most severe mental health challenges in our district.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So, folks, we have a very, very interesting topic today. Before we get started, I want to thank our friends listening to us on WDJY FM 99.1 and those who have joined us newly from FM 93.5 WWNN. Before we get started, I have three housekeeping messages that I want to deliver. One is that we can now accept calls. So near the end of the show, we're going to take calls from you, the listening audience. And the number you can reach us at is 678-495-4345. Once again, that's 678-495-4345. So get your questions ready. We're excited to take them. Also, remember that United Intentions will be at the Connection Spring Festival this Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that you can download our UI Radio app from the iTunes Apple Store and listen to our shows 24/7. Lastly, stay tuned for Thursday as we have an episode of Whole Healing with Dr. Amy Dairies at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, Traci, let's get started here. First, I want to ask you, I'm always curious as to what drives people, what motivates, what compels people to do what they do and to become who they are. Why are you, in particular, so driven to help our youth with regard to their mental health issues?
Over my career in education, I've witnessed many young people who have tons of potential but have struggled with mental health challenges. And because of the stigma of mental health challenges in our country, in our society, so many of those students are not successful in school, they drop out of school, and worst case scenario is we lose our young people to suicide when mental health issues are not addressed. I'm very passionate about opening the bridges and opening the conversation so that students and families do not have to be embarrassed about mental health challenges, and we can take care of those in a healthy way as opposed to unhealthy.
Excellent. Very, very good. Thank you. What are some of the common problems that our young people are dealing with today?
I think the most common problem we see today in our schools is anxiety.
Right.
Couple that with depression. Also, many of our young people, both boys and girls, struggle with eating disorders. And of course, we have the bipolar disorders, things like that, which are not as common, but we still do see that in school. But I think anxiety is what we see growing so rapidly.
Yeah, and there seems to be so much pressure today. You and I have had some interesting discussions, and one of the things that I pointed out, and it's kind of laughable today, but it's very true, and I'm being very sincere. When I grew up, I was that kid who had a blast. I was known as a really good fisherman, and I could be the guy that if you wanted to go on a Mark Twain adventure, I could catch the most frogs, snakes, turtles, and anything else. So I remember, kids used to say, Nelson's going out catching snakes or frogs. Let's join him. So there was this really neat element of play. And somewhere it seems today that that's gotten lost, that's not important anymore, that we don't value time for kids to play or to daydream anymore. Somewhere in the process, in other words, of going from the 1970s or 80s, life's gotten real and it's gotten really, really serious.
It has, and that is something we see so often with our young people today. And as adults, we often feel like we are in a rat race to keep up with everything going on. And our children are no different. We have students who are involved in so many wonderful activities, but all piled up together become where our students just can't manage and they don't have enough downtime, not getting enough sleep.
Sure.
And that exacerbates the anxiety. And then the depression comes with that when students constantly feel like they can't measure up because they can't manage all of it.
I mean, Tracy, I have young people coming in and I'll say to them, how are you doing? And they'll say, I'm kind of overwhelmed. And I'll say, how come? Of course, realizing there are many reasons, but wanting to hear their version of why they're overwhelmed. And it always goes something like this. Dr. Nelson, I play 2 sports. I've got basketball games this week. I've got football practice this week. I'm on rec teams. I'm in all advanced classes. Not everybody's in advanced classes, but I tend to get a lot of these kids in who are overachievers. And I think, gosh, when do you have time to daydream? When do you have time to... we watched cartoons when I was their age, or we watch shows, Hallmark shows, and I'm being, by today's standards, probably a little naive and maybe a little silly because things are so much more magnified and dramatic from our shows to the expectations of our kids. And so, as you mentioned, they're doing so much that it's hard to keep up with life. And if they're young and probably ill-qualified at a young age because they haven't been taught strategies for handling all this pressure, they probably feel like, here I am, 13, 14, 15, 16, I'm already failing in life. What am I going to do as I get into adulthood?
And they do. Many of our students do feel overwhelmed. Part of it is because of the schedule that a lot of young people try to keep, but also we live in a society of perfectionism.
Yeah.
Our students see it in media, they see it on social media, and are constantly trying to measure up to this standard that isn't really achievable in all the categories that they're trying to achieve it in, because now they feel like they have to be the best athlete, the smartest student, also do all these community service hours to get into the right college, and any aspect of that they don't achieve, they turn into failure.
Right.
And part of that is social media. Nelson, when you and I grew up, if we made a mistake, if we struck out at a ball game, no one posted it to a million different sites where we had to relive it every time we opened our phone.
Yeah.
So we could move on. It wasn't out there in infinity. Now our students relive their mistakes every time they open a cell phone, if those things have been posted. And it keeps them constantly reliving that feeling of not being successful.
That's very, very interesting. So you can never really escape your past. It's front and center always. It's a very, very good point.
It is. And it's hard for our students to sometimes realize, for young people to understand that if you take a picture and post it of someone else, that you can do real damage to that person, and not just for a moment, but for years to come.
Right. Yeah, very, very good point. Tracy, I want to take a look at some of the statistics as provided by the National Alliance on Mental Illness with you.
Yes.
And I'm going to read some of them. Some of them are just very, very, very sobering to me. They're actually hard for me not to get emotional over. And I know you know some of the ones I'm talking about. Certainly feel free to interrupt me and comment on any that you feel impressed to do so. The first one I'm going to read indicates that 20% of youth ages 13 through 18 live with mental illness. That's an astonishing statistic.
It is astonishing, and what's more astonishing is that 20% is based on students who have sought help for a mental illness.
I knew you were going to go there, and that's really scary because, please correct me if I'm wrong, probably most people don't go for help.
There are a lot of young people who still don't get help for a lot of reasons. One is mental health resources for young people are not easy to find in any state, certainly not here where we're broadcasting from in Georgia. but also there is that stigma associated,
Yeah,
so they don't
certainly.
always ask for help.
Yeah, who wants to be labeled? So these could be even far higher than what they're indicating. In other
Correct,
words.
they could
Okay,
be.
all right. 11% of youth have a mood disorder. Wow.
Yes. So, and in the mood disorder, we do talk about depression and anxiety, and that lack of self-regulation are probably the biggest mood disorders that we actually see in our schools.
And tell us what self-regulation is so everybody knows exactly what we're referring to.
So self-regulation is part of social emotional learning, and that is being able to regulate your own emotions. As adults, I like to use the example of if we're behind somebody in a grocery store line, the cashier is having trouble and we think it's taking too much time.
Right.
We're able to regulate ourselves and not have a meltdown.
Yes.
Most of
the
are.
time. Yes.
Most of the time. However, if our young folks have not learned those skills, they can't always manage not having a meltdown.
Sure.
So we refer to that in education as a lack of self-regulation.
Got it. So they indicate here that 10% of youth have a behavior or conduct disorder. First of all, let's talk about what that is, actually.
So when we talk about a behavior disorder or a conduct disorder, it's defined as those antisocial or socially unaccepted behaviors on a consistent basis. So not maybe one meltdown, but we frequently see students in classrooms who are aggressive to other students and teachers,
Right.
tossing furniture, having full-out meltdowns. And
Yeah.
when this becomes a pattern, then we know it's more than a kid having a bad day. It's
Yeah.
really become something that we actually have to address. And so it's that repetitive and persistent behavior.
Okay, key words there. So we have 8% of youth actually are labeled as having an anxiety disorder.
Correct. And that means the disorder has gotten to the point that they have to seek some kind of medical, either therapeutic or medication, some kind of solution to be able to just manage their day-to-day.
Well, this is really interesting to me because most of the people I know that I see professionally require me to say repeatedly, you really need to seek help. And some of them never do. Actually, probably 50% or more of them never do. And of those who do, not many of them stick with it long enough. And I think a lot of that, I mean, you could certainly say money's a factor, time is a factor, et cetera, getting off time for work. And these are adults. And then, of course, the stigma. It's so dangerous to label somebody because labels tend to stick forever.
They do. And that's part of the stigma. And I think a lot of times families and young people avoid getting the help they need
Right.
because they don't want that label. And also because for so many of us, anxiety makes it sound like a weakness.
Yes.
Like I
Yes.
should be tough enough to handle my busy life.
Of course.
But our young people, they don't have those skills that many of us may have as an adult. And so the anxiety disorder becomes unmanageable. One of the things that is very sobering to me in the division in our school district, we also supervise the hospital homebound students, and those are students who cannot attend school. So originally this was intended for maybe students undergoing chemotherapy or
Yes.
some other kind of life-sustaining medical treatment. But over half of our students now who are unable to come to school for medical reasons, it's anxiety that's preventing them from coming to school.
Traci, I have to ask you this, and I know it's multifactorial in nature. What drives this? Are we having expectations of our youth that are unrealistic and are driving them to have these problems?
I do think that there is a part of our culture that has become so driven
Yes.
that we have very young students who are already feeling that they need to declare a sport or they need to declare a college. And I do understand that there's a lot of pressure for students to get into the top tier schools and universities. However, most folks are not equipped to make that decision at 12 or 13.
No, I wouldn't think so. All right, so this is an interesting statistic to me. 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin at age 14.
That's right. So one of the concerns that we as educators have is that so often we dismiss concerns of our youth because we think they're being manipulative or they're trying to get out of doing something.
Right.
But our research shows that true mental illness does often begin as young as 14, sometimes earlier. So we can't wait till 35
Yeah.
to admit that there's an issue. If we help our young people and their families be comfortable addressing it at an early age,
Right.
we can help them with coping skills that prevent the anxiety or the mental illness from interfering with daily life.
Great. Excellent. Traci, we're going to take a moment to listen to our sponsors. Folks, you're listening to me, Dr. Nelson Bullmash, and my guest, Dr. Traci Doe, here on Health Matters. We'll be right back where we're going to continue this overview of the statistics on mental health in our youth.
My name is Maria Sullivan, and welcome to The Silver Lining, a show about overcoming anything life throws at you and seeing the blessings from within. I've dealt with people from all walks of life, people who have believed there was no way out or have given up on life. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is always a silver lining if you know where and how to look for it. Join me on the United Intentions Network and on Spreaker at United Intentions as we discuss the unfortunate situations in life and learn how others have found their power from within. Hear how they've transformed their world and the world around them for the better. I invite you to listen in, and I hope to see you there.
All right, we're back. I'm Dr. Nelson Bullmash. You're listening to Health Matters, and my guest, Dr. Traci Doe, and I are discussing mental health in our youth. Traci, I want to go over just a few more of these because I think they're too important, not for people to have an idea about the potency and the sobering nature of what we're talking about. Is that okay with you?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So the one here that is really important to me is it indicates that 37% of students with mental health illnesses will drop out of school. And of course, you know, gosh, if you can't finish high school, that sets a bad precedent for being successful later in life.
It does. And the statistic that goes along with that is how many of our young people and adults
Right.
who are in our juvenile justice and adult justice system
Sure.
also struggle with mental health. And unfortunately, there's a strong correlation between being in the justice system and not finishing school.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Matter of fact, you have here indicated in this document that 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system have mental illness. That's a staggering figure.
It is. It's a staggering figure. And unfortunately, if left unaddressed before they go into that system, our juvenile justice system is equally as overwhelmed as many other authorities and organizations are in our nation. And so they have limited resources to truly treat the mental health issue of the students in their system.
Yeah, and let's be real about this. As far as I know, and please correct me if I'm mistaken on this point, but when you go into the juvenile justice system, they don't teach you home ec and how to come out and be a part of a normal functioning capacity as an adult in what we call normal living.
Right. That's correct. They don't. They have too many students and too few staff, and really just try to maintain as best they can.
All right. This is the one that I had the most difficulty with. It's difficult to even say this aloud, but I want to say it aloud because I think people need to understand this. Suicide is the second leading cause of death between the ages of 10 and 14 behind accidents.
That's correct. So only accidents, which most of are auto accidents, have a higher number of than suicide with our young folks. And it's almost to the point that I feel like our society is becoming desensitized because we hear of it so often. And young people are able to Google, watch suicides, learn lots about it. And that's something not imaginable for most of us as adults. But when our students are feeling overwhelmed, they often do start thinking about it. And if we don't take them seriously, then this number continues to grow.
Wow. Let's talk a minute about social emotional learning. I mean, to me, this is a huge part of getting a handle on this problem. Tell us about, I know there are 5 different characteristics
There
of
are.
social emotional
So,
learning?
in the past few years in the field of education, we talk more and more about social emotional learning. And the 5 pillars of that are self-awareness, self-management, which is the self-regulation we talked about
Yes.
earlier, social awareness, meaning our young people are able to understand how other people feel and develop empathy.
Right.
Relationship skills. And when we talk about relationship skills, as you and I have talked about before, we mean face-to-face, not
Yes.
text. Not
Yes.
a text relationship, but able to have a face-to-face conversation, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And in that, understanding not only how it affects you, but how it affects others in your circle and how it affects our world.
Wow.
Responsible decision-making. And I think our technology oftentimes gives students a shield from really developing social emotional learning.
Right.
Because so many of our students, they'll say, I talked to Nelson today, but what they really mean is I sent him a text.
Yeah.
I didn't actually have a conversation.
It's interesting. These are so valuable. I can't tell you how many times, for example, once again, a young person's come to my office and I look at them and I put out my hand and it's the handshake is like this and they're looking away. You know, I was taught, hi, I'm Nelson Bloomash. It's very nice to meet you. You had an actual interaction.
Yes.
You looked at each other. You spoke to each other. You shook each other's hands. Something kind of magical happens. It's hard to use nasty expletives when I'm looking you in the eye and I'm 3 feet away from you. You agree with me on this?
Yes, very much. And that is something that our educators are encouraging now. You'll
Yes.
see lots of teachers standing at the door, shaking hands, greeting their students
Right.
eye to eye when they come in the classroom.
Yes.
And part of that is because we do see that students aren't developing that on their own. And part of that is because, you know, their friends might be social media connections and not actually people
Yes.
that they know and have interactions with. So,
Right.
And we do hear that from industry. When industry comes and talks with us about people we're sending from schools and from colleges for the employment world,
Sure.
they say they're brilliant. They know all the technical skills we need.
That they do.
It's the soft skills, the people
Right.
skills, getting along with others, working on a team that are still lacking.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Let's do this. Let's talk about some of the warning signs. What should we be looking out for with our young people to identify that they do or don't have problems?
Well, and this is something that I think we talk about a lot because if you're working with young people, whether you're in the field of education, medical profession, whether you're treating them, whether you have children. Now, especially if you have children, you know teenagers are already moody. If you don't know
Yes,
that,
yes.
you really haven't been
Yes,
paying attention.
yes.
So oftentimes, the true warning signs get dismissed as being typical teenage behavior.
Right.
So I think it's so important that parents, too, are putting down their devices and putting down their phones and paying attention to their young folks in their house. Mood swings that are more elevated than normal, crying, a loss of interest in whether it's lacrosse, whether it's a boyfriend,
Yeah, their
whether
favorite
it shows
habits
their
or
favorite
people.
habits,
Yeah.
avoiding social activities, any of those change in sleeping habits.
Yes.
We talked earlier about students not always getting enough rest because they're overwhelmed, but a change in habits because oftentimes one go-to strategy of dealing with depression is you just sleep it away.
Yeah, check
and that's
out-
for adults and kids.
Right.
Any kind of panic. We see that with students who are having school anxiety is that overwhelming panic.
Right.
And parents are saying, I can't get him out of the car. I can't get my child out of the car and into school. And that's that panic, the difficulty concentrating.
Sure.
Aside from the fact that they're distracted by, social media or a girlfriend or a boyfriend. But those changes in behaviors, teachers and parents really need to pay attention to because they're real.
And it seems like all too often we don't pay attention. Why is that?
Well, I think that our lives are very busy.
Right.
Everybody's very distracted with things going on. And I think sometimes it's slowing down, having some rituals at your house, like no phones at the dinner table, eating dinner together as a
Yes.
family, having a conversation with your students. I laugh when I was an elementary school principal for 10 years. I would love to open car doors for kids to get in the car in the afternoon.
Right.
And I would say, Mom, Dad, I'll put your kid in the car as soon as you put your
Put the
phone down.
Very good. Good for you.
Some people would roll their eyes, but they knew it was the right thing. Put your phone down, talk to your children,
Well,
find out
Tracy,
what's going on.
It's a critical time where you haven't seen your child all day. You've been at work in your world. They've been in their world. And it's that critical interface time where it's like, who are we going to be for each other? Am I so involved with my own life and my own affairs that you're not important enough for me to bring my attention to you? Or are you so important that I'm going to put my day aside now and I'm going to have you and only you in front of me to interact with in a very real, very authentic way?
And you make a very good point, because so many of our young people, they just need someone to listen. And it's very difficult in adults when in our minds, we know what is right for this child. I know what decisions you need to make. I know when you need to study. But when young people are developing, they don't always need us to solve everything for them. They need us to listen, accept them as they are, and guide them, but not in a demanding, judgmental way.
Yeah.
So many of our young people feel like they're not enough, not good enough, and that is
Right.
because oftentimes adults are judgmental.
It's funny. I did some interesting things, and I know when I was rearing my kids, sometimes people used to say to me, "What, you did what?" I, for example, used to take my daughter fishing with me, and it wasn't about the fishing, Tracy. The fishing was just a pretend activity. And don't get me wrong, I love fishing, but I didn't know that my daughter would or wouldn't. But the thing is, once we got out there, it didn't matter if we fished or not. It was time away from the world where it was quiet. You could hear crickets and you could see ducks, swimming on the surface. And sometimes a deer would come up and drink water before us as we were sitting on the shoreline. And it was a time when the world would stop, if you will, and we could have real conversations where my daughter could say, "Hey, Daddy, could we talk about something?" And of course, the answer always has to be yes. Because by the time your kids get to, "Could we talk about something?" you better believe it's bothering them a lot.
That's true. And I think it's so important that parents start those habits early
Yes.
with their children, so that by the time they hit their teenage years, when they naturally start having feelings, thoughts that they aren't as comfortable sharing, that those bonds are already set.
Yeah.
It's so important that we all, and educators too, that we focus on individual students, not what we need to get done,
Right.
what we need to accomplish, but hearing our students and valuing them and allowing them to be valued for exactly who they are and exactly how they are, whether it's a lifestyle choice, whether it's a traumatic experience
Sure.
they're going through, is they need us to listen and accept them the way they are and not judge and constantly send the message that they are not enough.
That's interesting. So do you think that sometimes we intentionally or unintentionally invalidate them?
I think definitely unintentionally. I would hope that adults don't do that intentionally, but I think unintentionally, because sometimes we don't really pay attention to what they're saying, or they may say they're having a problem, and our response is, "That's nothing.
Yeah.
I dealt with way worse things than that when I was your age." So while that's not intentional, we are still saying to that child, what is concerning you is not important enough
Right.
for me to really listen and help you work out solving problems. They don't always want us to solve their problems.
Yeah.
We have to guide them in solving those.
Sometimes I think they just want to be heard. My daughter, as you know, was a very, very successful athlete. And I asked her one day, I said, honey, you don't play, if you will, with a lot of girls. I'm just curious. I don't mean to be personal, but is there a reason for that? Or do you just feel like you're more connected to the guys that you work out with? And she said, Dad, that's really kind of an embarrassing question for me, but as my father, I will answer that for you. She said, most of the girls have no understanding of who I am. I'm a weightlifter to them, and they have no understanding of why I would want to pick up heavy objects. And so I'm kind of a social pariah at my school. The guys either are intimidated or they're really awed by it, and they get it. But I feel like I'm this strange person who's achieved a very high level of success that nobody really wants to be around because it's too strange for them. Guys are intimidated, and the girls think I'm wacky.
Right.
So All right. So listen, Traci, this is a great conversation. We're going to take another break and get a word in from our sponsors. Folks, we'll be right back. This is Dr. Nelson Blumash. You're listening to Health Matters. My guest today is Dr. Traci Doe, and we're talking about mental health and our youth. Stay tuned.
The Think Different Consulting Group is focused on channeling the brilliance of the Steve Jobs Think Different 1997 marketing campaign, and we embody the following words from that ad. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Call Michael Litton at 770-552-0418 to see how we can help your organization think different about your marketing, sales, and advertising campaign.
Dr. Nelson Blumash, we're back. My guest is Dr. Traci Doe. We're talking about mental health and our youth. Don't forget, later in the show, we're going to be taking calls, and the number you can reach us at is 678-495-4345. Okay, Traci, let's do this. Let's talk about erasing the stigma of all these labels. How do we do that? And why is it so important to do that?
So there are obviously stigmas associated with mental health, not just for our youth, but also for adults. And there are some very powerful people that are working hard to change that stigma. Rosalind Carter,
yes,
the wife of former President Carter, is a huge advocate for that. And I think with our young people, we have the opportunity while they are young to help them understand that if you had a sinus infection or strep throat,
right,
you would seek treatment, whether
yes.
that's a shot, medication. So there's no difference in having a mental health issue. You need to seek treatment. It is a condition. It is not something you choose. Now, I do often say that for some of our young people who suffer with anxiety, we as adults have done that to them.
Right.
So that
yes,
I do think
we're part
that's
of the
a
problem.
possibility.
Sure.
But for our young people, you don't get sick on purpose. You don't have a mental health challenge on purpose. So, but we have to erase the stigma. We have to erase people saying you're crazy, you're weird, you're nuts, you need to be locked up somewhere. And then also with some of the violence that we see, it makes people afraid to say that they have a mental health issue because they don't want people to say, uh-oh, you're going to cause problems. Because most young people with anxiety and depression really only harm themselves. They're not looking to harm other people. They turn it inside.
Right.
And it's a very self-destructive process.
You know, you bring up an interesting point. Another part of this stigma is that if you indicate this, for example, in a medical form, it goes with you for the rest of your life. And so every job application you fill out, what's one of the questions that they all ask you? Do you have any mental problems?
Yes, because we refer to it as problems.
Yeah.
And so often people, families also, and young people are afraid to acknowledge that they need help, whether that help might be therapy, whether that help is a support group, whether that help is strategies, or whether it might be medication. All of those things are valid ways of helping our young people deal with mental health because, as we talked earlier, left untreated, our worst case scenario is suicide, and that is devastating for families and communities.
Yeah, very, very true. It's funny. I almost smirked a moment ago, not because of what you said, but I remember listening to Dr. Amen who's just got some fabulous information out there and some great books if you want to pursue this even deeper than we are today. And one of the things he talks about is he spoke somewhere in the Midwest at a place called Normal. And I don't know if it was Iowa. Have you heard this?
I have.
So, and he said, I went to Normal, wherever, Iowa or wherever it was in the Midwest, and I wanted to see what normal folks did in this city. And he said playfully, let's be real clear. There is no such thing as normal. We all have problems. The question is, what's on your recipe for the day?
Right.
What is your particular problem, in other words?
Yeah, it makes me think about, I have a good friend who, she lives in Ohio now, and she was struggling with her own son and some mental health issues, and I found this sign I bought her, and it said, around here, normal is just a setting on the dryer.
Oh, I love that. I love it.
And that's true for all of us.
It is.
Because, you and I have talked previously about this. When people post their vacation pictures on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat,
Yes.
wherever they do, they don't show you the ones where the family is arguing about where to have dinner.
Yes. Dad, when are we going to get there? We've been in the car for 9 hours.
They show you the sunset and beautiful beach and everybody's in khaki and white.
Yes, dressed perfectly. Everybody has a perfect tan and everybody's looking at the camera perfectly. Yeah, that's not really so much life.
No, it's not reality for many people. I don't know of any people, but but still our young people are measuring their own lives by that setting for normal.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not very realistic.
It's not very. Thank you for that, because it's so true. I have young people come in and they might see some world-class athlete in my waiting room and they'll say, was that so-and-so from the San Francisco 49ers? Yes, it was. Wow, you get to see him? Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Or is that so-and-so from the Falcons? Yes, it is. Well, what is it, what's it like dealing with them? I mean, they seem perfect. Yes, they seem perfect. Keyword. Trust me when I tell you their life is more stressful perhaps than even yours. Really? How come? I see them catch passes and run for touchdowns every Sunday. Yes, you do. But do you know how much pressure is involved in maintaining a $10 million contract?
Right. And our young people don't see all the in the weeds of life.
Right.
And so they think that would be the perfect solution, is to have a $10 million contract, not always understanding the work and the pressure and stress it takes to as you said, to maintain that and to maintain that spot at the top.
My son was creating a little levity in a conversation that we were having, and he said, Dad, I just want you to know something, and I apologize. I don't remember if the statistic deals with becoming a high school or an NFL. I think it was a professional athlete. 1 out of 1 million young boys becomes a professional.
That's probably very accurate.
1 in 1 million. So he was being playful with me. He said, so Dad, I want you to thank me for getting a college scholarship and getting all my expenses paid for. Thank you very much. I thank you, son. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Very, very, very good. So we talked about also in another conversation, like just being really open about this. The thing is, when everything is hush-hush and we don't face the reality that we all have good and bad days and we all have problems. I had a young woman in yesterday who was really troubled because she said, I can't go anywhere without wearing makeup. I mean, and for her, this was devastating. Like, she could not, and I'm not making light of this. Mm-hmm. So please, if this person sees this, I'm not in any way marginalizing this person. I'm not making light of it. But she said, I'm really, I think the word she used was terrified for anybody to see what I really look like. And it speaks to how fragile we are and how much pressure we put on ourselves. This is a really, really beautiful person. I mean, you would laugh not at the person, but at the notion of this, because if you saw this person, you would say, I'm sorry, is this the first thing that you would think is this is a joke because the person is so beautiful. Yet this is a very, very real problem to this person.
It is. And so many of our young people look for that place to belong. Interesting, when we talked earlier about the statistics for suicide, a couple of groups that are at a higher risk of suicide than typical is our students that are on we call it the autism spectrum or have Asperger's, very high functioning.
Right.
So they are at a significantly increased risk of suicide. as well as our young people who identify as gay, lesbian, transgender,
Yes.
or some of the other categories that deal with gender identity, because they don't always feel that acceptance. And it is still, in some circles, not socially acceptable to have those
Yes.
open conversations.
Right.
And that is very detrimental to our young
It
people.
must be horrible to be in a situation where you are in a particular subcategory, for lack of a better term, and to be hated or to be mistreated for your sexual orientation or religious orientation or an ideological orientation. That has to be horrible.
And I think even more so for youngsters, as we, often say, as adults, we make a lot of our own choices. We hopefully have lived long enough to develop some of the coping skills to
Right.
navigate life and the fact that life is not always easy. But it's very different for our young people, our young teenagers and our adolescents, because they haven't had the opportunity to develop these skills. They're relying on adults to help them navigate the world. And sometimes we drop the ball and we're not doing a good job of it.
Sure.
either.
So we really, really need to be mindful of the minefield, if you will, that our kids walk through, so we can identify problems and help them understand what they're going through, and give them a path through that field so they don't get blown up, if you will, as they go through the highly turbulent time of youth. Because let's not kid. I mean, you have huge fluxes in hormones that really, quite frankly, are unbelievable. I remember as a young man going, wow, my body feels really strange and different. What's going on? There's an inside transformation that leaves, and I can't speak to women, but I'm sure in some ways it has to be similar, meaning you have dramatic changes in what's going on inside, and you're growing and changing your mind, your body. And so it's hard to understand that all. And I think we have to create a safety net, and perhaps what we're going to talk about in a moment, I would be remiss if I did not give you an opportunity. So I'm going to stop here and catch myself, because I almost forgot. You have some very special friends locally that you assist. I want to give you a moment to shout out to them and to tell us about who they are.
I do. I hope that Darren and Stacy Hurst are out there listening, but they are the founders of an organization called Erin's Hope for Friends. Erin was their teenage daughter who she took her own life very tragically, and her message was, it could have been different had I had a friend, just one.
Wow.
So Stacy and Darren have formed an organization called Erin's Hope for Friends, which really provides a very typical opportunity for teenage hangout time for students who have autism and Asperger's in a high functioning range, a chance to play pool and just be a teenager and develop those skills. So I do some volunteer work with them, and we're very proud of the opportunity that we're allowing for a group of students who are very susceptible to that. So I hope they're listening. And Erin's Hope for Friends has done a lot of wonderful things for students, and they happen to be here in Alpharetta, where we happen to be broadcasting
That's
live.
fantastic. Wow. Thank them, please, on my behalf. It's so good to know that people like that are out there. And, it's interesting, because now knowing what I know, I have had friends who clearly are I'm not going to say suffering, forgive me, that's the stigma again, who are dealing with, who are impacted by issues that we would say are on the autism spectrum.
Yes.
And, some of the most brilliant people I've ever met are some of those people.
Oh, absolutely. And we often refer to them as quirky or weird instead of accepting them for who they are. And then obviously some of our young people do need help with social skills. And that's what we're here for, is to help teach them and help them acquire those social skills, but not to isolate them and put them in a category.
I remember, I'll tell you a funny story, just because it was funny, unique for me. I was at the University of Michigan, and I was in a high-level chemistry class, and I was paired up with a guy to do an experiment with. And I looked at him, and he didn't, I don't mean this to be nasty or anything, but his hair wasn't combed. He was standing in some kind of like a shirt you'd wear for hunting, and then he had his pajama bottoms on and combat boots. And I remember looking at him going, okay, this is a unique expression. And I started interacting with him, and he was incredibly brilliant, and he was so kind, but he had no awareness, like that you might not want to wear pajama bottoms and combat boots and a hunting shirt. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Like, it was visually, I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to need just a second to take this in and to know how to process this and go with this. But I remember thinking, he was so nice and so kind, and math, chemistry, physics, there wasn't a problem he couldn't solve. So we became quick friends, and I have a real high capacity to say, okay, treat me well, I'll treat you well, we become friends, we enjoy the world together. But I'll never forget that. Like I knew something was very different about him, and I was very nice, and he thanked me because I was quite a large guy. I was on the powerlifting state championship team, and I remember him being very scared. Like, he literally said to me, are you going to hurt me? No, but I'll do chemistry with you. Are we good with that? Okay.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's just that acceptance. You accepted him just like he was, and I'm sure that made a difference for him.
It made a real big difference for him. We became friends. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I was that guy that kind of made sure nobody bullied him. And he did very, very well in life. I think he went to an Ivy League school, and I never saw him after that. But I thought, what a cool guy. Unique, interesting, but very cool, very, very capable. So let's talk about, and I want to ask a question. Do we have any callers online? Okay, not yet. Okay. Well, it's the first time we've ever had it. Let's do this, Traci. We've got to take another break.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know it was very engaging and a lot of fun. Folks, we'll be right back. It's Dr. Nelson Bulmash. You're listening to Health Matters. And my special guest today is Dr. Traci Doe, and we're talking about mental health. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
DRS provides professional audio mixing and mastering services. They also provide other creative services such as voiceover editing, audio restoration, and audio forensics. They have great customer service, their work is fast and efficient, and their prices are affordable. You can learn more about their creative services by visiting them on the web at drsatl.com. Again, that's drsatl.com, or call them at 404-590-0779. Again, that's 404-590-0779. DRS, when the right sound matters.
All right, folks, welcome back. It's Dr. Nelson Bulmash. You're listening to Health Matters, and my special friend and guest today is Dr. Traci Doe. We're discussing mental health in our youth. I want to throw this out to you for those who are interested. I know this is the first time we've ever done this, but we will be taking calls in minutes. We're going to be wrapping up with phone calls. So the number again is 678-495-4345. Once again, that's 678-495-4545. Excuse me, I messed you up. I'm so sorry. Let me give that to you again right this time. That number is 678-495-4345. All right, Traci, I want to wrap it up, but I want to talk about a couple more things before we do.
Okay.
Let's talk about talking about things openly. I know that you were mentioning to me in an earlier conversation that there are actually programs that are being developed now. So let's take a look at that. Clearly, without talking to our kids, without talking to our fellow workmates and friends and family about what's going on, we can't change it. So how do we go about having these conversations? Because I know you're really good at that.
I am. I actually told you the story that my New Year's resolution for the past 2 years has been to ask the questions that make everyone else in the room uncomfortable. And I've done a good job at that. But it's so important that we talk openly about all the things that impact our young people, whether that's equity, by race, by socioeconomic status, by gender identity, but also that we talk openly about things that are happening with our students, whether it is the anxiety and the depression, but to let students know it's okay. Some of our schools have this wonderful thing in some of our high schools. If you went there, you would see a sign in the window of some of the doors that say, "I'm a safe person." And that is the adult way of saying to a child, if you need someone to listen, if you have a problem,
Fantastic.
I'm here and I will listen.
Yes, excellent, excellent. So I'm going to ask you this because I know you're very good at it. Give us some tips. How do you say to a young person or any person, Traci, you're recognizing that there's the behavior indicates that the person's not okay. Something is clearly wrong. How do you initiate a conversation with that person to make them feel like you're safe to speak to and you're not going to be judgmental, and if they need to talk, they can, and it would be effective for them too, because they can get an entry point, if you will, or leverage into whatever the problem is. How do you go about that?
So I think the first thing we do is we do try to somehow connect on a relationship level with our students, and hopefully teachers are already doing that. First and after that is to do it in a respectful manner. We would never call a student out in front of other students, but we would be in an area where someone could not hear our conversation. And I think the mistake we make is we say, "How are you doing today? Seems like you're not feeling so good," as opposed to being very intentional and saying, "Nelson, I noticed that you've kept your head down for 30 minutes of class.
Good point.
I have
Very
noticed,
good point.
if you're at home, I've noticed that you slept 12 hours. I have noticed that you haven't talked to your friend Jessica in a while. I haven't heard you mention that." So being very specific rather than saying, "Is everything okay?" Because most kids are going to say, "Yeah, I'm fine."
That's such a good point. I had a very awkward falling out with a really, really close friend of mine, a former roommate, and I was going through the eventual death of my father, and he was going through the death of his brother and some other really difficult matters. And I was really preoccupied with my own life. And I said, "Look, I'm going to ask you how you're doing, and please tell me, but just be aware I'm in a really rough position myself." And I would say to him, "Are you doing okay? Do you need anything?" And his automated response was, "No, everything's okay." Well, sometime later, I got a really, really nasty letter saying that I wasn't there for him. And I thought, well, this is very odd. This is very, very odd. I don't understand this, because clearly I did. And then I got a call from his girlfriend, who's a wonderful, wonderful woman, another doctor, and she said, he did the same thing to me. So the mistake we perhaps made was that we were very generic. We said, "You okay? Do you need anything?" Instead of saying, "Hey, you've been in your room for the last 3 weeks. You haven't come out. You haven't talked to us. What's going on?" Maybe that would have been more effective.
I think so. And I think naming the behaviors that are concerning us.
Yeah.
And we try to teach our young folks to do that. We have a little mantra about suicide prevention and saying, "Friends ask, are you okay?" But then we go on to say that if you know your friend's not okay and they say, "Yes, I'm fine," you don't walk away.
Yeah. Well,
we talk about the specifics. Here's why I know you're not okay. These are the specific behaviors.
Thank you for that, because very, very tragically, I ended up with cancer. He ended up with the same kind of cancer, and he moved away, and we never reconciled that. So he ended up dying, and we were estranged, which I've never felt good about. Traci, listen, we have a caller. We're going to take that.
Awesome.
Yes. Hang on one second here. We're going to... Renee, are you there? Renee's going to be with us one moment here. Having a little trouble connecting. Pick it up. Okay. Renee, it's Dr. Nelson Bulmash. How are you? Hang on one second here. We're having a little trouble with the transference. Okay, Renee, I can barely hear you. This is Dr. Nelson Bulmash. Can you hear me? No, the sound's not great. Thank you, Traci. Turn that up. Renee, go ahead and talk again. I'm going to do the very best I can. Go ahead and speak, and let's see. We're having a little bit of issue hearing you here. Go ahead and try it again. I'm sorry.
I can hear you.
There we go,
you go.
Renee.
Perfect.
Renee, it's like magic. Thank you for joining the show. I'm Dr. Nelson Bulmash. What's your question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
yes, I can hear you now.
Sure. Yeah, I'm talking now. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just
Can you
fine.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes. What's your question,
Renee?
Renee? Yes.
I'm not sure Renee can hear us.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. I'm sorry, we're having some technical challenges. We can now hear her, but evidently she can't hear us. Renee? All right. Do you guys want to see if you can handle that and we'll go on with the show?
We'll get her.
All right. Sorry, folks. Renee, I'm sorry. It sounds like you can't hear us. We'll have you on in just a second. We're having some kind of a technical challenge here. So anyhow, thank you. That was a big mistake, and I have regretted that my whole life because, number one, I was very sidetracked. I was dealing with the eventual death of my dad, and I loved my roommate. He was an amazing guy, and I know he loved me, and I did not have the communication skills at the time to know how to dig underneath the already always response that he gave, which was, yeah, everything is okay. And it wasn't. It was just, it was so huge that we didn't know how to bridge that, okay, what's really going on here, you know?
And that's another challenge our youth have, and sounds like even adults too, is
Yes.
We expect people to read our minds. And just like your friend said, he was okay, but he expected you to know he wasn't.
Yeah.
And so we do try to instill building those skills where you can really express how you're feeling, because
Right.
that's so important in communication, in relationships, because oftentimes we just can't expect people to know exactly what we're feeling and what we're dealing with, even if they dig, unless we have the skills to explain our feelings.
Yes, Tracy. This brings me to a very interesting question, and that is, do you think maybe we should develop a communication program that really taught our young people how to communicate at a very, very effective level? I mean, certainly that would help them go through youth better, and that would help them become far better communicators as parents and as employers and employees.
And I do think, and I think that there are some beginnings of that protocol out there in the education world, but I think it is really important that both with parents and with our youth that we work on those communication skills, because so often that's, we get lost in translation, so
right.
to speak.
Yeah, very well said. So we only have about 3 minutes left. I want to give you a moment, if you will. I call it final thoughts, Tracy. What are your final thoughts for this episode?
So my final thoughts would be for anyone that works with youth is to acknowledge when they are having mental health challenges. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Parents, do not be afraid to ask your students about it. Please don't be afraid to seek help, and don't be afraid to loop in the school, the counselors, the teachers. If
Right.
your child is struggling, as educators, we need to know that so that we can help. And it takes a team. And I think I would say mostly as parents understand that if your child is struggling with a mental illness, it is not a life sentence. You don't have to give up.
Yeah, very good
There's
point.
help. There's lots of things out there, but you first have to acknowledge it and accept that it's real.
Right. Yeah, you can't change it if you don't acknowledge it, if you don't know what you're initially dealing with. It's funny. Times have changed so much, and we've spoken a lot about that today and before in the past, Tracy. One of the things I remember when I spoke to my father, I remember him saying, son, times are very different. And he died, it'll be 11 years ago in July. And he used to say, we used to take a village, if you will. Meaning if I got in trouble out in the street somewhere, I had a dozen relatives that were
Yes.
waiting at my mother's and father's house to deal with me when I got
Yes.
home. And things were handled that way, and they were handled with immediacy. So we've got a lot of exciting things to look at here. This has been a great conversation, and I want to have more, and I hope you'll join me in the
Yes.
future. So lastly, if you can, sum up real quickly. I understand that there's a program being developed currently. Can you give us a quick 10-second highlight about what's going on with the development of the program that you and I discussed earlier?
Yes, we've been working very much to be able to work with the social emotional learning and also the suicide prevention.
Yes.
And helping everyone that are educators be able to recognize those signs and also deal with the after effects of a suicide in a community, because oftentimes we don't know how to talk kids through it when it happens to someone they know.
Excellent. Traci, thank you so much.
Thank
you did
you.
an outstanding job. I really appreciate you being here. Folks, it's Dr. Nelson Bullmash. You've been listening to Health Matters. I am signing out. I will be back in 2 weeks with another amazing guest. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of Health Matters with Dr. Nelson.